Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Have you ever gone in and signed a contract? I'm sure you did when you bought a house or when you bought a car. You signed a contract. That's the way we make agreements with each other today. Covenants contracts were a little bit messier in biblical days. We want to look at one of those messy ones today in Exodus chapter 24. Exodus 24 comes after the giving of the Ten Commandments on Sinai, but in the midst of the giving of a whole lot of rules and regulations about Israel's behavior and Israel's life. In Exodus 24, verse 3, Moses comes to the people, and it says he tells them all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Yahweh has spoken we will do. And Moses wrote that all down. And then in verse 6, Moses took half of the blood. He had taken blood from offerings, from burnt offerings. Moses took half the blood, put it in basins, and half the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that Yahweh has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you in accordance with all these words. Blood was a feature of Old Testament covenants. And this is a pretty messy scene. Moses takes a bunch of blood, divides it in two, throws half of it on the altar, and then throws half of it over the people. So the people are covered with this spattering of blood that comes as a part of this covenant ceremony. This particular covenant symbolizes that God and the people were locked in this covenant. We're in agreement on this covenant. We've looked at covenants before. If you've been following the Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School sessions, we looked at a covenant with Noah, where God made a promise to Noah that he'd never flood the world again, and the rainbow was a symbol of that covenant. That was a one-way promise. No matter what Noah did, God was going to keep his promise. We looked at a covenant with Abraham, where God had Abraham divide these animals in two, and then Abraham went to sleep while God walked down the bloody path in between these two halves of animals. And God bound himself in covenant. Abraham was asleep. It was a one-way covenant. No matter what Abraham did, God was going to make him a great nation, he was going to give him land, and he was going to make him a blessing to the nations. It was a one-way covenant. Then we looked at a two-way covenant with Jacob and his uncle Laban. When they couldn't trust each other, they sat down, made a covenant, and said, I can't trust you, you can't trust me, the Lord will have to watch over between us, and we're going to not cross this line and be a bother to each other. That was a two-way covenant. When we get to this covenant in Exodus, when the blood is thrown on the altar, symbolizing Yahweh, and the blood is thrown on the people, symbolizing the nation, both are locked in this covenant. It's not a covenant that determines whether they will be God's people or not. They're already God's people. Nothing they can do will change that. It's a covenant that, as we read further, will determine how long they'll stay on that land that God really never relinquishes title to. How long will they stay in the promised land? That depends on how they see their God and therefore how they keep the laws and the regulations that he gives them. It depends primarily on their being able to say and their being able to do and carry out the worship of Yahweh that God calls them to do. It's a two-way covenant. The story goes on in 9. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire, stone, like the very heaven for clearness. It's interesting when you get to Revelation chapter 4, or Ezekiel 1 for that matter, you see that same scene, only in Revelation 4, you see it from the bottom up. John is looking up and seeing that pavement of sapphire. Verse 11, he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. Two features of covenant here. The sharing of a meal, they ate and drank, and the shedding of blood. And of course, we see both of those covenant features borne out in the new covenant when Christ lays down his life and sheds his blood for you and me to call us to be his. And the covenant meal that we share in the Lord's Supper. God's act on your behalf, bringing his grace and his mercy to bear in the lives of poor sinful beings like you and me. Another covenant, the most important covenant, the one that comes through Jesus, and it involves blood too.